It wasn't the sweltering heat of the boxcar that woke me. It was the screech of metal, tearing the silence apart, the jarring sound of fate grinding its wheels on the rails. My 9-year-old heart felt as if it were being squeezed shut as I realized I was trapped in an empty, hurtling boxcar. I screamed. I beat against the heavy wooden door until my small knuckles bled, but only the cold, iron sound of the wheels answered. This was not a nightmare. This was the beginning of my true story, a journey stolen by the cruel whistle of a train. If you are listening from anywhere in the world, leave a comment and subscribe, because there are truths that need to be spread, even if they might shake your beliefs. There are stories, no matter how painful, that must be told. After the screaming stops, my dear, a different kind of quiet sets in. It's the sound of your own heart breaking, the sound of your old life slipping away with every clatter of the wheels. In that silence, I wasn't just a lost girl anymore. I was becoming someone new, someone forged in fear. In that deafening silence, a childhood ends and a terrifying new journey begins. This single, accidental moment would go on to define the entire course of Emily's life. Stay with us to find out how a lost little girl learns to survive. I stayed glued to the small window, watching my familiar life recede with every curve of the tracks. First, I recognized the hills that surrounded our town, then the fields where I sometimes helped with the harvest. But soon, everything became strange. Landscapes I had never seen, wide rivers I didn't know existed, big cities with houses packed one against the other. Hunger began to set in when the sun was already in the middle of the sky. My stomach rumbled like an angry little animal, and my mouth was as dry as the earth in summer. I had only brought a piece of bread wrapped in a small cloth, which I ate slowly to make it last, but it was gone too quickly. Fear was worse than hunger. It was a different kind of fear than I knew. Not the fear of being scolded by my mother or tripping in the dark. It was the fear of a child who discovers that the world is immense and she is too small to find her way in it. When the train finally stopped, it was almost night. The station was large, full of yellowish lights and hurried people. I jumped out of the boxcar with wobbly legs, looking in all directions, hoping to see James come running to get me. But there was no one I knew in that sea of strange faces. "Little girl, are you lost?" asked a lady in a faded pink dress and a straw hat. She had a kind face, but when I tried to explain where I came from, the words all came out jumbled, and she couldn't understand. How could I explain that I came from the Colonel's Mill town if I didn't even know where it was on the big map of the world? The woman took me to a station guard, a man with a gray mustache who asked questions I couldn't answer. "What's the name of your town, little girl? What's your mother's full name? Where does your father work?" For each question, I could only shake my head and cry softly, because a 9-year-old girl doesn't know these important things that adults need to know. I ended up sleeping at the station, curled up in a corner, using my thin sweater as a blanket. The cement floor was cold, and the sound of the last trains of the night echoed hauntingly through the empty corridors. Each whistle reminded me of the train that had brought me there. And I wondered if James was also looking for me, if my mother was crying at home with Lily in her arms. The next day, a young woman who worked at the station gave me a glass of warm milk and a piece of bread and butter. It was the most delicious food I had ever tasted, not because it was special, but because it came with a kind smile and comforting words that I so needed to hear. "What's your name, dear?" she asked, sitting next to me on the same bench where I had spent the night. "Emily," I replied, and it was the first time my voice had been steady since the train had taken me away. Emily is a beautiful name, you know. It reminds me of the brave heroines in the old stories. She ran her hand through my tangled hair with a gentleness that reminded me of my mother's hands. "You are brave too, Emily. Brave girls always find their way home." But the days passed, and the way home seemed farther and farther away. Other station employees tried to help me. They wrote down descriptions of my family, sent telegrams to neighboring stations, but our little town was too small, too forgotten, and the information I could give was too vague. You see, a child's world is so small. I knew the smell of my mother's cornbread and the feel of the dirt path under my feet, but I didn't know the name of the county or the nearest big city. To the grown-up world, I was like a ghost from a place that didn't exist on their maps. A week later, a serious woman in a black dress with a notebook in her hand came. She talked to the adults using words I didn't understand, but from the way they looked at me, I realized they were deciding what to do with me. "You are going to a place where you will have a warm bed and food every day," the woman said, trying to smile. "It's a place where other children who are also far from home live. You will be like one big family." Here is the first true crossroads of her new life. The ghost of a family she longs for, versus the promise of one standing right in front of her. This decision isn't just about a new home. It's about whether to let go of the past. Let's find out which path she chooses to walk. It wasn't what I wanted to hear, but a 9-year-old girl doesn't have much choice when the adult world decides for her. I was put in a horse-drawn buggy that smelled of old leather and taken to what they called an orphanage. It was a large house of red bricks, surrounded by a high wall and a well-kept garden. Street Vincent's orphanage was run by nuns, who wore long habits and spoke in low voices. The Mother Superior, a tall, thin woman like a fishing rod, received me in a room that smelled of lavender and candle wax. "Here you will learn to read and write," she said, her hands clasped on the dark wooden desk. "You will also learn a trade so that when you grow up, you can support yourself. But first, you must learn the rules of the house." The rules were many. Time to wake up, time to sleep, time to pray, time to study, time to work, all organized like a clock, different from the free life I had in the town, where I played among the trees and helped my mother according to the sun and necessity. But it wasn't a bad place. The nuns, though serious, were fair. The food was simple, but sufficient. I had a bed all to myself, with white sheets that smelled of coconut soap. And, for the first time in my life, I could take a bath in a tub with warm water that relaxed my tired muscles from so much work in the fields. Still, every night before I fell asleep, I would close my eyes and try to remember my mother's face, Lily's laugh, the deep voice of James calling me to play. I guarded these memories like precious treasures, afraid that time would make them fade like old photographs left in the Sunday. That first night, lying in a strange bed that didn't smell like home, was the first true test. It's one thing to lose your family, my dear, but it's another thing entirely to feel yourself losing the memory of them. Each night, I would replay their faces in my mind, a desperate ritual to keep my own soul from becoming as orphaned as my body. The months at the orphanage shaped me like water shapes a stone, slowly but persistently. I learned to live by the rhythm of the other girls, to share the bathroom, to make my bed with the corners tucked in tightly, just as Sister Benedicta liked, and not to cry loudly at night so as not to wake anyone. There were girls of all ages in there. Some, like me, had arrived lost. Others were left at the door by families who couldn't afford to feed another mouth. There were also the true orphans, whose parents had gone to heaven too soon. The one who became closest to me was Sophia, a frail girl with straight brown hair who was about my age. She had arrived there 2 years earlier, after her mother died of tuberculosis and her father disappeared into the world without a trace. Sophia could read and write better than many adults, and it was she who taught me my first letters. "I'll tell you a secret, Emily," she said one afternoon, as we sat under the apple tree in the courtyard, peeling potatoes for dinner. "I write letters to my mother. I know she can't receive them, but I write them anyway. It helps me not to forget." The idea struck me like a hot coal in my heart. Sophia gave me a piece of paper and a worn pencil, and I wrote my first letter to my mother. The letters came out crooked, some words misspelled, but every stroke on the paper carried all the longing I kept inside my chest. "Dear Mom, I hope you, James, and Lily are well. I am in a big house with other girls. There is food every day, and I already know how to write my name properly. Do you remember me? I remember you every day." I folded the letter carefully and kept it under my mattress. I could never send it. But writing those words was like talking to her from afar, as if my voice could fly through the air and reach our little town. The seasons passed, and I got used to the routine of the orphanage. Early in the morning, at 5:30, the bell would ring and we would all get up for morning prayers. Then came breakfast, bread with milk and coffee, and sometimes a spoonful of apple butter when it was a feast day. The mornings were dedicated to studies. Sister Benedicta, a short, plump nun who had the patience of Job, taught me to put letters together, to do sums, and even a little geography. It was through her that I discovered that the world was much bigger than I had imagined, full of countries and oceans I didn't even know existed. "Emily, you are a smart girl," she would say, adjusting her small glasses on her nose. "With an education, you can go far in life." The afternoons were for domestic chores. We learned to cook, to sew, to wash clothes, to take care of the vegetable garden. It was knowledge that the nuns said was important for when we grew up and had families of our own. I especially liked taking care of the plants. Working with the soil reminded me of the times I helped my mother in our yard at home. And it was while taking care of the tomatoes and lettuce that I met Sister Rosario, a younger nun who had soft hands and a kind way of understanding the hearts of children. She noticed that I was always quiet and thoughtful when I worked in the garden. "What are you thinking about, little Emily?" she asked one afternoon, when the sky was orange and the air smelled of damp earth after the rain. "I'm thinking about my family," I replied, pulling out a weed that was growing among the carrots. "I wonder if they still remember me." Sister Rosario sat down beside me on the soft earth, dirtying her clean habit without a care. "Family love doesn't disappear, Emily. It's like the roots of these plants. Even if we don't see them, they are always there, giving the plant strength to grow. Your family may not be here, but the love you have for each other is still alive." Her words gave me a comfort I didn't know I needed. For the first time since I had arrived there, I felt that perhaps it was possible to be happy, even far from home, that perhaps I could put down roots in that place too. Sundays were different. After the long mass in the orphanage chapel, we had free time. Some girls played with dolls made of cloth bundles stuffed with rags. Others made up circle games in the courtyard. I liked to be alone, sitting on the bench under the oak tree, watching the people pass by on the street on the other side of the wall. It was a habit that brought me hope and sadness at the same time. I always imagined that maybe one of these Sundays I would see James walking down the sidewalk, looking for me, or perhaps my mother would appear at the gate with Lily in her arms and say they had come to take me home. But the Sundays passed, one after another, and the street remained full of unknown faces. At Christmas that year, I received my first real present, a storybook that the Mother Superior had chosen especially for me. They were tales of princesses and dragons, of heroes who saved maidens, and of talking animals who gave wise advice. I read each story so many times that I memorized some of them by heart, and at night, when the other girls couldn't sleep, I would tell these stories softly in the dark. Emily tells stories just like a grandmother. Little Susan, a 5-year-old girl who had recently arrived and cried every night from homesickness, would say. My stories made her fall asleep with a little smile on her lips, and that gave me a pleasant feeling of being useful, of being able to give someone the same comfort that I needed to receive. Winter came with a bone-chilling cold. The orphanage had large fireplaces in the main rooms, where we would gather at night to do our homework, or to listen to Sister Benedicta read stories from the Bible. The smell of burning wood, mixed with the cinnamon aroma of the tea the nuns served, created a cozy atmosphere, almost like the feeling of home that I kept in my memories. It was on one of those winter nights, with the rain beating against the windows and the wind shaking the thick cloth curtains, that the Mother Superior called me to her office. My heart pounded. Usually, being called to the Mother Superior's office meant a scolding or important news. "Sit down, Emily," she said, pointing to the wooden chair on the other side of the desk. There was a cup of steaming tea waiting for me, which was unusual. "I need to talk to you about your future." The Mother Superior's words fell on me like cold raindrops. "Emily, there is a family interested in meeting you. They are good people from the countryside in Pennsylvania. Mr. Robert works with cattle, and his wife, Mary, cannot have children. They came here specifically looking for a girl your age." My world swayed like a leaf in the wind. For all these months at the orphanage, I had harbored the secret hope that someone from my real family would come for me. The idea of going to another family, no matter how good they were, meant accepting that I might never see my mother, James, and Lily again. "I don't want to go, Mother," I whispered, my hands trembling around the hot cup. "What if my mother comes looking for me and I'm not here?" The Mother Superior sighed, and for a moment I saw in her eyes the same sadness that I carried. She must have seen many children go through this dilemma, many little hearts torn between hope and reality. My child, you have been with us for over a year. We have done all the searches possible. We sent letters, telegrams, we talked to people from several small towns. If your family were looking, she didn't finish the sentence, but I understood what she meant. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay looking at the dark ceiling of the dormitory, listening to the quiet breathing of the other girls, wondering if it was a betrayal to accept a new family. Sophia, in the next bed, noticed my restlessness. "Can't sleep?" she murmured softly, so as not to wake the others. I told her about the conversation with the Mother Superior, about the couple who wanted to adopt me, about the fear and confusion I felt in my chest. Sophia was quiet for a while, thinking. "You know, Emily, sometimes I think we have to make choices, even without being sure if they're right. You can stay here until you grow up, if you want, but you can also go and meet these people. Who knows, maybe it's a chance to be happy in a different way." The next day, the couple came to meet me. Robert was a tall, strong man, with large, calloused hands from working with animals, but his eyes were as kind as James's. Mary was a small, delicate woman who wore a yellow dress like a daffodil and had a smile that lit up her whole face. "Hello, Emily," said Mary, crouching down to be at my height. "You are even more beautiful than the Mother Superior told us." They didn't seem like bad people. Robert asked me if I liked animals, and when I said yes, his eyes lit up with joy. Mary wanted to know if I knew how to sew, if I liked to help in the kitchen, if I was afraid of thunderstorms. They were simple questions, but I felt that they genuinely wanted to get to know me, not just have a child to raise. "We have a small farm," Robert explained, his voice deep but gentle. "There are cows, chickens, some pigs, and an old horse named Thunder. The house is simple, but it's cozy, and there's a school in the nearby town where you could continue your studies." Mary took my hand gently. Her hands were soft and smelled of rose-scented soap. "Emily, we want you to know that if you come with us, you will be our real daughter. But we also understand if you prefer to stay here. We won't force anything." I spent a whole week thinking. Sister Rosario helped me see things from another angle during our work in the vegetable garden. "Sometimes, when a plant can't grow in one place, we transplant it to another soil," she said, working the earth around the basil plants. "It's not because the previous place was bad, but because it needs different conditions to flourish." Slowly, I began to understand that accepting a new family didn't mean forgetting the old one. It was like having two homes in my heart, one made of memories and longing, the other made of new possibilities. At the end of that week, I went to the Mother Superior and told her I wanted to visit Mr. Robert and Mrs. Mary's farm. It wasn't a final decision, just a first step on an unknown road. Saying goodbye to the orphanage was harder than I imagined. Sophia gave me a tight hug, and a letter she had written for me to read when I felt very lonely. The other girls said goodbye with little kisses and promises not to forget me. Sister Benedicta gave me a new notebook to continue practicing my writing, and Sister Rosario put a small bag of sunflower seeds in my bundle of clothes. "For you to plant in your new home," she said, her eyes moist with tears she tried to hide. "And to remember that you can always put down roots where there is love." The journey to the farm was by buggy, then by train, then by buggy again. It was a long journey, but different from that first train trip that had changed my life. This time, I knew where I was going, and I had chosen to go. The farm was in a region of gentle hills, covered in green pasture. The house was made of wood, painted white, with green windows, surrounded by a garden where roses, jasmine, and cornstalks grew. It had a porch with a hammock strung up and rocking chairs. And when we arrived, the afternoon sun gilded everything with a warm and welcoming light. "Welcome home, daughter," said Robert, helping me down from the buggy. Mary showed me the room that would be mine, small but tidy, with a white-painted iron bed, a light wood wardrobe, and a window that overlooked the pasture where the cows grazed peacefully. On the walls, she had tacked up some drawings of flowers that she had made herself, and on the dresser was a glass jar with sprigs of wild berries that perfumed the air. "If you don't like anything, we can change it," she said anxiously. We want you to feel at home here." That first night on the farm, lying in the new bed that smelled of sheets washed with lye soap, I listened to the different sounds of country life. The lowing of the cows, the distant crowing of a rooster, the wind passing through the pine trees that surrounded the house. They were strange sounds, but not frightening. They were the sounds of a place where simple, good people lived, their simple, good lives. I opened the window and looked at the starry sky, brighter than any sky I had ever seen. And for the first time in a long time, I felt a little bit of hope growing in my chest, like a seed sprouting in fertile earth. The first months on the farm passed like gentle water. Robert and Mary treated me with a kindness I didn't know existed. It wasn't just goodness, it was genuine care, as if I were a fragile little flower that needed just the right amount of sun and water to grow. Mary taught me how to make a loaf of bread, kneading the dough with her hands until it was smooth and silky. She taught with patience, letting me make mistakes and try again, until my loaves were almost as delicious as hers. Robert showed me how to milk the cows, how to throw corn to the chickens without scaring them, how to comb Thunder's mane with a soft brush. The school in the nearby town was small, with only 2 rooms and 1 teacher for each. Mrs. Elizabeth, who looked after the younger children, was a patient lady who noticed when I got lost in thought. Sometimes, in the middle of a math class, my mind would wander far away, imagining where James might be at that moment, if he still remembered the little sister he had lost at the station. "Emily, you have a knack for your studies," said Mrs. Elizabeth one late afternoon, after the other children had gone home. "But sometimes it seems like your head is somewhere else. Do you want to talk about what's bothering you?" How could I explain that a part of me had never left that train station, that even though I was happy there was always a little bit of guilt, as if being well meant betraying the memory of my first family? At home, Mary noticed these moments too. One afternoon she found me sitting on the porch, looking at the dirt road that led to the town, with that distant expression that sometimes took over me. "Daughter, may I sit here with you?" she asked, already settling into the rocking chair beside me. We sat quietly for a while, just listening to the wind rustling the leaves of the maple tree and the murmuring of the chickens scratching in the yard. Mary didn't force conversation when she sensed I needed silence, and this understanding made me love her even more. "You know, Emily, when I was a girl, I lost my younger sister in a flood," she said suddenly, her voice as quiet as someone telling a painful secret. "Her name was Rose. You know, I sometimes hear you whisper the name Lily in your sleep, and it always makes me think of her." My heart leaped in my chest. All this time, I didn't know that Mary also carried a loss, a longing stored in the depths of her soul. I spent years wondering if she had managed to save herself, if someone had found her downstream. Until one day I understood that some questions we take to the grave without an answer, but that doesn't mean the love we feel for those people disappears. It just becomes different. It becomes a part of us that no one can take away. Sometimes, the deepest bonds are forged not in shared joy, but in shared sorrow. In this quiet moment, Mary gives Emily a gift far greater than a home, the permission to grieve without guilt. Let's hear how this simple act of kindness changes everything for our Emily. Her words hit me like a ray of sunshine piercing through a heavy cloud. For the first time, someone was telling me that it was normal to carry these longings, that I didn't have to choose between loving my new family and not forgetting the old one. "I think about them every day," I confessed, the tears starting to slowly trickle down my face. "I wonder if my mother thinks I abandoned her, if James is still looking for me, if Lily grew up to be as beautiful as I imagined she would." Mary got up from her chair and knelt in front of me, holding my small hands in her warm ones. "Your mother would never think you abandoned her, Emily. A mother knows her children's hearts better than anyone. She knows you had no choice. She knows you love her wherever you are." That afternoon I cried like I hadn't cried since the first days at the orphanage. But it was a different kind of crying. It wasn't just sadness, it was also relief. The relief of being able to talk about my first family without fear of hurting Mary, of being able to keep those memories as precious treasures, without guilt. From that day on, our relationship changed. Mary started asking me about my life before the orphanage, about the customs of my town, about the songs my mother used to sing to put me to sleep. And I started talking about Robert and her to people at school, no longer as the parents who adopted me, but as my father and my mother, because I discovered that one's heart is big enough to hold more than one family, more than one home. It's like those old yards that have space for many different trees, each with its own roots, its own shade, its own fruits, but all part of the same garden. Summer came hot that year, and with it came a surprise that would change everything again. Robert came back from town with a letter in his hand and a strange expression on his face. It was a mixture of joy and concern that I couldn't decipher. "Emily, I need to show you something," he said, sitting down with me at the kitchen table while Mary prepared some lemon balm tea. "A letter arrived at the post office in town. It's from someone who says they know your family. For years, her past was a story, a faded memory she carried alone. With a single letter, that story has just walked into the room, real and breathing. The peace Emily has found is about to be tested in a way she never imagined. Let's discover what this letter holds. Some might call it a miracle, a one-in-a-million chance. But I've learned that when a story isn't finished, the world has a funny way of writing the next chapter for you. A whisper here, a shared memory there. And suddenly, a letter finds its way across the country, carrying the weight of a lifetime. My world stopped. For a moment, there was no sound, no air, just the ink on that paper. For years, my past was a story I told myself, a ghost I lived with. And in an instant, that ghost walked into the room, real and breathing, and I didn't know if I should run to it or run away. The floor seemed to disappear from under my feet, and for a moment, I couldn't even breathe. For all these months, I had learned to live with uncertainty, to accept that I might never know what had happened to my mother, James, and Lily. And suddenly, there was a letter that could bring answers. "Who sent it?" I asked, my voice coming out weaker than I wanted. Robert unfolded the letter carefully, as if handling something sacred. "It's from a man named Frank. He says he worked for a few years at the train station in your region, and that he recently heard, through acquaintances, that a family was looking for a girl who got lost a few years ago." The words danced in front of me like leaves in the wind. Frank, that name meant nothing to me, but the possibility that someone knew something about my family made my heart race like a frightened horse. Mary came closer and put her hand on my shoulder in a protective and affectionate gesture. "What do you want to do, daughter? We can answer the letter. We can go there and talk to this gentleman. Or we can leave things as they are. The choice is yours." It was too heavy a decision for a girl who had not yet turned 12. But at that moment, looking at the loving faces of Robert and Mary, I understood that I was not alone in deciding. I had a family that would support me whatever my choice was, and that gave me the courage to face whatever truth this letter might bring. But courage, my dear, is not the absence of fear. It is a flickering candle in a storm. And in the days that followed, my storm raged. The relief of knowing my family was alive was quickly swallowed by a guilt so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. I started seeing ghosts in broad daylight. My mother's tired face in the reflection of the window, James's laughter in the rustle of the corn stalks, Lily's small hand reaching for mine when I gathered eggs. "Emily, you've barely touched your food," Mary would say at dinner time, the plate of chicken stew with okra getting cold in front of me. "I'm not hungry," I would reply, pushing the pieces of meat from side to side with my fork. The truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about a question that tortured me. Did I have the right to be happy while my blood family suffered? Wasn't every laugh of mine, every moment of joy on the farm, a betrayal of the memory of the woman who brought me into the world? School became a strange refuge. There, at least, I had lessons to occupy my mind and classmates who didn't know about the drama I carried inside. But even Mrs. Elizabeth noticed the change in my behavior. "You've been very quiet lately, Emily," she said one afternoon, after the other children had gone home. Did something happen at home? How could I explain that finding news of the family I thought was lost forever, instead of bringing me peace, had turned my world upside down? How could I say that I now felt torn in half, with half of my heart pulling one way and the other half pulling the other? "It's complicated, teacher." That's all I could say. It was little Mia, a 7-year-old neighbor who sometimes came to play with me, who ended up helping me see things differently. We were playing house under the maple tree, when she, with that sincerity only children have, asked, "Emily, why have you been so sad lately? Your adoptive parents are the nicest I know." "It's not that, Mia," I explained, arranging the little clay plates she had brought for our game. "It's just that I might find out news about my first family, and I don't know if I want to know. But why not?" She looked at me with those big, curious eyes. If it were me, I would want to know everything. Even if it was sad, at least I wouldn't be wondering anymore. The simple wisdom of that little girl hit me like a stone thrown into still water. She was right. Spending my whole life wondering might be worse than discovering the truth, even if it hurt. That night, I found Robert and Mary in the kitchen, where they were drinking coffee and talking quietly about cattle prices. The smell of fresh coffee mixed with the aroma of cornbread that Mary had made for the afternoon snack created a cozy atmosphere that gave me the courage to speak. "Dad, Mom," I said, using those words for the first time with complete naturalness, "I want you to answer Mr. Frank's letter. I want to know what he has to tell me." The relief on their faces was so visible I could almost touch it. Mary stood up and gave me a tight hug, one of those hugs that speak more than words. Robert placed his large, warm hand on my head, a paternal caress that had already become familiar. "We'll do this together, daughter," he said. "Whatever this man has to tell us, we'll face it as a family." The reply to Frank was written carefully. Robert, who had the best handwriting of the three of us, wrote while Mary and I dictated. We explained where I was living, told a little about how I had ended up there, and asked him to tell us everything he knew about my birth family. The letter was sent on a Wednesday, and Robert said the reply could take a few weeks to arrive. I tried to get back to my normal routine, helping Mary with the household chores, taking care of the animals with Robert, going to school and doing my homework. But it was like trying to sleep with your heart pounding with anticipation. It was during these days of waiting that I discovered something surprising about myself. I realized that no matter what Frank's letter brought, I didn't want to leave the farm anymore. Robert and Mary had become my real parents, not just on paper, but in my heart. The life we had built together, with its simple routines and its small moments of happiness, had become too precious for me to give up. This realization came one Sunday morning, when I woke up early and found Mary in the kitchen preparing breakfast. She was humming a song I didn't know, stirring the oatmeal on the wood-burning stove. Her hair was tied up in a loose bun, and she was wearing the yellow apron that Robert had given her for her last birthday. "Good morning, my daughter," she said, giving me a little kiss on the forehead, as she did every morning. It was at that moment that I felt, with crystal clarity, that this was my place in the world. Not because I no longer loved my first family, but because the love I felt for Robert and Mary had grown deep roots in my heart. "Mom," I said, hugging her from behind as she stirred the oatmeal. "No matter what Frank's letter says, I don't want to leave here. You are my family now." Mary turned in my arms, and I saw tears of joy shining in her eyes. "Oh, my dear girl," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "You have no idea how those words make my heart happy." 2 weeks later, the reply arrived. Robert came back from town with an envelope in his hand and that same cautious expression as before. This time, however, I felt more prepared to face any news. We sat in the living room, on the crochet sofa that Mary had made with her own hands. The afternoon light came through the window, golden and soft, creating an almost solemn atmosphere. Robert opened the letter slowly and began to read aloud. The first lines confirmed that Frank had indeed worked in the region of my hometown. He said that a few months after my disappearance, a woman had appeared at the station looking for a lost girl. The description she gave matched mine exactly. My heart began to beat faster as Robert read the woman's name. It was my mother. She had traveled through several towns, several stations, asking about me, showing everyone an old little photo we had taken at a town fair a few years earlier. But then came the part that broke my heart. Frank said that my mother had fallen ill during these travels, and that James, my older brother, had to take care of her and little Lily. The illness had been severe, a fever that lasted for months and left its mark on her memory. She got better, Robert continued reading, but she was different. Sometimes she remembered you as clear as water. Other times she seemed not to know who they were talking about when they mentioned your name. James grew up too fast, taking care of everyone, and ended up marrying young to a girl from the neighboring town. The letter ended with a piece of information that was both comforting and painful. My family still lived in the same region. James had built a small house near his mother to take care of her and Lily. And every year, on my birthday, they lit a candle in the window, hoping that I could see it from afar and know that they had never forgotten me. The words of the letter echoed in my head like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. My mother, sick, with a failing memory. James, married, taking care of everyone like a grown man before his time. Lily, growing up without her middle sister, perhaps not even remembering me properly. And that candle lit every year on my birthday, that image cut my heart like a sharp razor. "Emily, you've barely touched your food," Mary would say at dinner time, the plate of chicken stew with okra getting cold in front of me. "I'm not hungry," I would reply, pushing the pieces of meat from side to side with my fork. The truth is, I couldn't stop thinking about a question that tortured me. Did I have the right to be happy while my blood family suffered? Wasn't every laugh of mine, every moment of joy on the farm, a betrayal of the memory of the woman who brought me into the world? School became a strange refuge. There, at least, I had lessons to occupy my mind and classmates who didn't know about the drama I carried inside. But even Mrs. Elizabeth noticed the change in my behavior. "You've been very quiet lately, Emily," she said one afternoon, after the other children had gone home. "Did something happen at home?" How could I explain that finding news of the family I thought was lost forever, instead of bringing me peace, had turned my world upside down? How could I say that I now felt torn in half, with half of my heart pulling one way and the other half pulling the other? "It's complicated, teacher." That's all I could say. At home, things got more tense each day. Robert tried to cheer me up by telling stories from his bachelor days when he traveled through the farms in the region buying cattle. Mary put even more effort into the foods I liked. She made fudge, donuts, peach cobbler, but nothing could lift the dark cloud that had settled over my head. It was on a night of heavy rain, when thunder cracked the sky and the water beat on the roof tiles like small stones, that the situation exploded. I was lying in bed, listening to the drips falling into the bucket that Robert had placed under the leak in my room, when I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. It was Robert and Mary arguing, something that never happened, or at least had never happened since I had arrived there. "We can't keep watching her waste away like this, Mary," Robert said, his voice heavy with concern. "It's been 2 weeks, she barely eats, barely talks. She's like a little ghost lost in the house." "I know, Robert, I know," Mary replied, and from her voice I could tell she was crying. "But what can we do? Force her to forget her family? Pretend that letter never arrived?" Maybe we should take her to meet her real family," Robert said after a long silence. "Even if it hurts, even if she decides to stay there, at least we'll know we did the right thing. And if we lose her forever?" Mary's voice came out in a desperate whisper. "What if she chooses to stay with them, and we never see her again?" "Robert, I don't know if I could bear it." Hearing that conversation was like getting punched in the stomach. I realized that my suffering was hurting the 2 people who loved me most in the world. Robert and Mary, who had welcomed me with so much affection, who had given me a home and a family, were now in agony because of me. I got out of bed, barefoot, in just my thin nightgown, and went to the kitchen. They were sitting at the table, their hands intertwined, their eyes red with tears. When they saw me, they quickly tried to compose themselves, wiping their faces with the backs of their hands. "Emily, you should be sleeping," Mary said, trying to smile. "It's cold, you'll catch a chill." "I heard you talking," I said, sitting in the chair between them. "I heard everything." Robert sighed deeply, running a hand through his graying hair. "Daughter, we're worried about you. Ever since that letter arrived, you've become a different person. We don't know how to help you anymore." "Do you really want to take me to meet my first family?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "If that's what will bring peace to your heart." "Yes," said Mary, taking my small hand in hers. "Even if it's the hardest thing we've ever done in our lives." I looked at those 2 faces that had become so dear to me, at those eyes that looked at me with so much love and so much concern, and I felt a pain in my chest unlike any I had ever felt. It was the pain of someone who realizes the extent of the sacrifice that good people are capable of making for love. "And what if I go and decide to stay?" I asked, testing if they were really willing to take that risk. "Then you stay," said Robert, his voice firm, despite the sadness in his eyes. True love sometimes means letting go of the one you most want to hold close. On that rainy night, sitting in the warm kitchen with my adoptive parents, I understood that the time had come to make the most difficult decision of my life. I couldn't continue living between two worlds, hurting everyone with my indecision. I needed to choose a path, even without knowing where it would lead. And the choice I made in the early hours of that morning would change everything forever. It's an incredible thing, isn't it? The selfless love of her new parents is what finally gives her the strength to face her old ones. She is no longer a victim of fate, but the author of her own next chapter. Let's join her on this journey back into the past. "I want to go," I said, the words leaving my mouth before my head had even finished thinking. "I want to meet my first family, to see with my own eyes how they are, to talk to my mother, even if she doesn't remember me well." The silence that followed was as heavy as lead. Robert and Mary looked at each other, and I saw in their faces a mixture of pain and pride. The pain of someone who might be losing the daughter of their heart, but the pride of seeing that daughter grow up and have the courage to face her past. "When?" Robert asked, his voice hoarse. "As soon as possible," I replied. "Every day I spend here thinking about them is one less day I have to truly live, whether here or there." Mary stood up and went to the window. She stood looking at the rain falling in the dark yard. Her shoulders trembled slightly, and I knew she was trying not to cry in front of me. "Mary," I called softly. She turned, and her eyes were shining with tears that stubbornly refused to fall. "Mom," I corrected, "I need you to understand something. No matter what happens there, you will always be my parents. It was you who taught me what it is to have a real family, what it is to be loved unconditionally. No one can ever take that away from me." It was then that her tears finally fell, and she came to hug me with a strength that seemed to want to keep me inside her forever. The preparations for the trip felt like preparing for something that should never happen. Robert wrote another letter to Frank, explaining that we would like to go and meet my family in person. Mary started packing my clothes in a small suitcase, folding each piece with exaggerated care, as if each fold were a silent prayer. Frank's reply came more quickly this time. He said he had talked to James, who had explained the situation to my mother on her more lucid days, and that everyone was anxious and, at the same time, nervous to see me. The journey would be long, 3 days by train and buggy. But Frank offered to meet us at the nearest station to the town. Mrs. Elizabeth, when she heard about the trip, gave me a little notebook to write about everything I experienced. "Sometimes, putting feelings on paper helps to understand them better," she said with the simple wisdom of someone who has been teaching children for a long time. Little Mia came to say goodbye on the eve of the trip. She brought a little paper flower she had made, especially for me, all colored with berry juice and marigold dye. "So you don't forget me," she said with that seriousness that little children sometimes have. "How could I forget you, you little rascal?" I replied, hugging her tightly. But inside, my heart ached thinking of all the dear people I was leaving behind, even if it was temporary. The night before the departure was the longest of my life. I stayed awake, late, looking out my bedroom window at the pasture where the cows slept peacefully, the maple tree that had given me shade on so many playful afternoons, the chicken coop I had helped Robert paint. Mary appeared at the bedroom door with 2 glasses of warm milk with honey. "Can't sleep?" she asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. "I'm scared," I confessed. Scared of not recognizing my mother, scared she won't recognize me. Scared of hurting you if I decide to stay. Scared of hurting them if I decide to come back. "Fear is a part of every important decision, daughter," she said, stroking my hair with her warm hand. "But do you know what I've learned in life? That we regret the things we didn't do much more than the things we did. Even when it goes wrong, at least we know we tried." On the morning of our departure, the whole house smelled of cornbread. Mary had woken up at dawn to make it, because she knew it was my favorite sweet. Robert was on the porch, checking the buggy's harnesses for the 3rd time, which would take us to the town where we would catch the train. Breakfast was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts, trying to commit to memory that moment which could be a final farewell or just a see you later. When it was time to leave, my little suitcase felt like it weighed a ton. Robert carried it to the buggy, along with a bundle that Mary had prepared with food for the journey. Homemade bread, cheese, apple butter, and a bottle of chamomile tea to calm the nerves, she said, trying to smile. The journey to the town passed in a flash of familiar landscapes being left behind. Mr. Anthony's mill, the chapel where we went for Sunday Mass, the school where Mrs. Elizabeth had taught me so many important things. Every place we passed seemed to wave goodbye. At the station, Robert bought the tickets, while Mary and I sat on a bench, watching the other passengers hurry with their luggage and their destinations. There were families saying goodbye, merchants carrying goods, children running between the legs of adults. Life was happening normally, indifferent to the drama unfolding in my small heart. When the train arrived, letting out that white steam and making that noise I knew so well, my whole body trembled. It was as if all the fears of the 9-year-old girl who had once woken up lost inside a boxcar had returned all at once. Robert must have noticed because he put his large hand on my shoulder. "This time it's different, Emily," he said. "This time you're not alone, and you know where you're going." We boarded the train together, found our seats, stowed our luggage. Robert sat next to me, Mary by the window. When the train started moving, she took my hand and didn't let go. For hours, we watched the world pass by the window. Green fields, winding rivers, small towns with their houses clustered around churches. And with every kilometer that passed, I felt closer to an encounter that could change my life forever and farther from the quiet life I had built on the farm. When we stopped at the first station to change trains, Robert bought some sandwiches, and Mary shared the apple butter she had brought. It was strange to eat those flavors of home sitting on a bench in an unknown station, remembering the first time I had made a train journey, lost and scared. "I'm proud of you," Robert said suddenly, chewing on a piece of bread, "for the courage to make this journey, for the way you've grown, for everything." "Me too," said Mary. "Whatever the outcome, you are doing the right thing." At that transfer station, looking at the faces of two people who loved me enough to risk losing me, I understood that I had been luckier in life than I had imagined. Even lost, even far from home, I had found true love not once but twice, and no one could ever take that away from me. On that train ride back, I was no longer the little girl torn between two worlds. I finally understood that home isn't a place on a map, but the people you carry in your heart. And my heart, my dear, had finally grown big enough to hold them all. On the third day of the journey, as the train began to pass through landscapes that stirred distant memories in my mind, hills with familiar shapes, streams that wound like lazy snakes, log cabins with yards full of corn stalks, I felt my stomach churn with nervousness. Frank was waiting for us at the station with an old but well-kept buggy. He was a man of about 50, with graying hair and hands calloused from hard work. He had kind eyes and a shy smile that inexplicably reminded me of the way James used to smile when we were children. "You look just like the description your mother gave," he said, helping us with our luggage. "Same dark eyes, same way of tilting your head when you're thoughtful." The buggy ride to the village took 2 hours on dirt roads that kicked up red dust with every step of the horses. Robert and Mary talked quietly with Frank about the region, the weather, the crops, but I barely heard them. My attention was completely focused on the landscape that was becoming increasingly familiar, as if my childhood memory was being slowly awakened. "That's the pond where you used to fish," said Frank, pointing to a lagoon surrounded by trees. "James told me you were a devil for catching minnows." My heart raced in my chest. I remembered that pond. I remembered sitting on the bank with a makeshift bamboo fishing rod, waiting for the little fish to bite the worm bait. I remembered James teaching me to be patient, saying that fish only bite when you're very still. When we finally saw the town, or what was left of it, I had to hold on to the side of the buggy to keep from falling. The place was smaller than I remembered, but poorer, more forgotten. Many houses were abandoned, with collapsed roofs and weeds growing in the windows. Mr. Johnson's little store, where my mother sometimes bought sugar, had become a ruin. "Progress didn't make it here," Frank explained, noticing my surprised expression. The young people left to find a better life in the big cities. Only the older folks, and a few who didn't want to leave the land, remained. The house where James lived with his family was on a small rise, surrounded by apple and pear trees. It was a simple but well-kept building, with whitewashed walls and green-painted windows. In the yard, I saw chickens scratching and a pig resting in the shade of a leafy tree. "They know we're coming," said Frank, stopping the buggy at the small wooden gate. "But everyone is still nervous." James appeared at the door before we even got out of the buggy. My older brother had become a grown man, tall and strong, as our father must have been, with a thick beard and large hands. But when our eyes met, I saw in them the same kind boy who had taken me to the station on that fateful day. "Emily," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "My little sister." I got out of the buggy with wobbly legs and walked slowly toward him, as if I were dreaming. James hugged me carefully, like someone hugging something fragile that might break, and in the smell of his cotton shirt, I caught the familiar scent of lye soap and honest sweat. "You've grown," he said, stepping back a little to look at me better. "But you still have the same thoughtful little girl face you had when you were small." Robert and Mary got out of the buggy and stood a little apart, respectful but watchful, like parents who want to protect but know they need to let their daughter have her moment. "James," I said with a trembling voice, "these are my father, Robert, and my mother, Mary. They are the ones who took care of me all these years." James approached them with the respectful posture of a simple countryman. "Thank you very much," he said, shaking Robert's hands firmly. "Thank you very much for taking care of my sister as if she were your own daughter." "She is our daughter," said Mary simply, "and she always will be, no matter what happens." James smiled, and in that smile, I saw that he understood perfectly what she meant. "Please, come in. My wife, Sarah, has made lunch for everyone, and our mother is anxious to see you, Emily." We entered the small but welcoming house. Sarah was a pretty young woman with braided black hair and a shy smile, who greeted us with the genuine hospitality of country folk. It smelled of beans, seasoned with bay leaf and toasted flour on the wood-burning stove. "Lily is at school," James explained, "but she'll be home in the late afternoon." "How is she?" I asked, anxious to know about my younger sister. "She's a smart girl, a good student," said James with pride. "She wants to be a teacher when she grows up. She has your way of tilting her head when she's concentrating, just like you." We all had lunch together at the wooden kitchen table. Beans with bacon, cornbread, collard greens, and pieces of pork that Sarah had prepared especially for the occasion. The food was delicious, but I could barely swallow from so much emotion. It was after lunch that James took me to see our mother. She was in the back room, sitting in a rocking chair, looking out the small window that overlooked the yard. When she saw me, her eyes lit up with a recognition that came from deep within. "My girl," she said, extending her trembling arms. "You came back." I ran into her lap, as if I were still the 9-year-old child who had gotten lost. She hugged me with surprising strength for a woman who seemed so frail and hummed softly the same lullaby she used to sing when I was little. But after a few minutes, I saw a confusion in her expression that broke my heart. She looked at me as if she were trying to remember something very important that was on the tip of her tongue but refused to come out. Are you Emily?" she asked with a painful doubt in her voice. "It's me, Mom," I said, holding her wrinkled hand between mine. "I'm your daughter, Emily." She smiled, but it was a lost smile, like someone trying to put together a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Emily, yes." Emily was little. She was afraid of thunder. "Are you afraid of thunder?" "I am," I lied, because I had actually overcome that fear a long time ago, but I wanted her to remember, even if just for a few moments. James explained to me later that she had better days and worse days. On good days, she remembered everything with impressive clarity. On bad days, sometimes she didn't even recognize him. The illness had been cruel, taking away pieces of her memory like a silent thief. But that afternoon, when Lily arrived from school, a beautiful girl with golden hair and bright green eyes, our mother had a moment of total lucidity. She looked at the three of us, her children reunited, and cried tears of pure joy. "My children," she said, calling us by the affectionate term she used when we were little. "You're all here, You're all home." It was in that moment that I understood something fundamental. A mother's love doesn't disappear even when memory fails. It can hide, it can get confused, but it's still there, stored in the deepest place of the heart. We spent a whole week in that small house, but it was full of love. They were days of painful and beautiful discoveries at the same time, like unearthing a buried treasure that has precious stones mixed with sharp shards. Lily clung to me like a burr, as if afraid I would disappear again. She was a sweet and intelligent girl, full of dreams and plans. At night, lying side by side in the little room she shared with our mother, she would tell me about school, about her teacher, Mrs. Irene, who encouraged her to study, about the books she borrowed from the municipal library in the neighboring town. "Are you leaving again?" she asked on one of those nights, her little voice filled with fear. "I don't know yet, Lily," I answered honestly. "I need to think a lot." "James said you have a family that loves you where you live," she said, turning to look at me in the dark. "Are they good to you?" "They are the best parents anyone could have," I admitted. "They treat me like a princess, they gave me an education, they gave me love." Lily was quiet for a while, thinking with that seriousness that children sometimes have when they are trying to understand the adult world. "Then you're lucky," she finally said. "You have two families that love you. I only have one. And sometimes I don't even know if our mother remembers that I'm her daughter." Those words cut me deep. Lily carried a weight I hadn't imagined. Taking care of a sick mother, seeing James sacrifice himself to keep the family together, dreaming of a better future, while reality was harsh and difficult. During the day, I helped with the household chores, trying to remember how to make cornmeal, how to plant corn, how to take care of chickens. My hands, accustomed to the lighter work on Robert and Mary's farm, quickly became calloused from the heavy farm work. James worked from before sunrise until after sunset. He planted corn and beans in land that yielded little, raised a few animals to sell at the market in the nearby town, and still found time to care for his mother and help Lily with her studies. Seeing him like this, carrying so much weight on his still young shoulders, made me feel a mixture of guilt and admiration. "You became the man of the house very early," I said to him one afternoon when we were drawing water from the well. "I had no choice," he replied without bitterness. "When you disappeared, our mother became desperate. She went looking for you everywhere, spent the little money we had, and ended up getting sick. Someone had to take care of everyone." "Do you blame me?" I asked, even though I knew the question was unfair. James stopped pulling the bucket rope and looked at me with those kind eyes that had never changed. "Emily, you were 9 years old. A 9-year-old child isn't to blame for getting lost. It was my fault for not taking better care of you that day." "It wasn't anyone's fault," said a voice behind us. It was our mother, who had come out of the house and walked to the well. She was having one of her good days when her memory worked like a well-oiled clock. "Mom, you should be resting," said James, dropping the rope to support her. "I'm tired of resting," she said with a trace of the energy I remembered her having when I was a child. "I want to talk to my daughter, Emily." The three of us sat in the shade of the maple tree, and our mother took my hands in hers, hands that still held the memory of so much work and so much affection. "Daughter, I remember the day you got lost as if it were yesterday," she said. "I remember the desperation I felt, the rush to find you. But I also remember something that you may not know." "What, Mom?" "The day before, I had prayed to the Virgin Mary, asking her to find a good family for you. Life here was getting very difficult, and I was afraid I wouldn't be able to give the three of you what you needed to grow up right." Her words took my breath away. "You were wanting to give me to another family?" "Not exactly give," she explained, "but I knew that alone I wouldn't be able to raise 3 children in the poverty we were living in. James was already growing strong. He could help me. Lily was tiny. I could carry her with me wherever I went to work. But you were smart, curious. You deserved a better opportunity." James listened in silence, and I saw in his eyes that this was the first time he had heard our mother talk about this. "When you disappeared, at first I was desperate," she continued. "But then, in the nights when I prayed for God to take care of you, I started to think that maybe it was the answer to my prayer. Maybe you had found exactly what I had asked the Virgin Mary to give you." And with those words, the heaviest chains on Emily's heart simply fall away. The guilt she carried for years was never hers to begin with. This is not just forgiveness. It's a complete rewriting of her own story. But how will this revelation shape her final choice? Let's find out. You know, the heaviest burden one can carry isn't sadness, but guilt. For all those years, I thought I was the cause of all their suffering. Hearing those words from my mother, it was as if the invisible chains that had bound my heart for so long simply shattered. Tears streamed down my face without me realizing it. But you got sick looking for me. I got sick because I'm a mother, she said simply. A mother can't stop looking for a lost child, even knowing it might be better for them to stay where they are. But now, seeing you here, seeing how you've grown up beautiful and educated, seeing the love those parents have for you, I know my prayer was answered. Mom, I began, but she raised her hand to interrupt me. Listen carefully to what I'm going to tell you, Emily. You owe me nothing. You don't owe me, you don't owe James. You don't owe Lily. You were a loved daughter for the time you were with us, and you continued to be loved even from afar. Now you have to choose where you will be happiest, where you will be able to grow and achieve your dreams. And if I choose to stay on the farm with Robert and Mary? Our mother smiled, and in that smile, I saw all the wisdom and all the love of a woman who had learned that loving sometimes means letting go. Then you stay with our blessing and our joy in knowing that you are where you should be. And if I choose to stay here, then you stay, and we will do everything possible to give you a good life, even with our limitations. That afternoon, sitting in the shade of the maple tree with my mother and my brother, I understood that I had spent all these years carrying a guilt that was not mine. I had tortured myself thinking that my family blamed me for getting lost, when in fact they had spent all these years blaming themselves for not being able to protect me. The forgiveness I thought I needed to ask for had already been given a long time ago. What I needed now was to forgive myself, to accept that sometimes life takes us down paths we don't choose, but that can lead us exactly where we need to be. That night, I wrote in my little notebook the most important words I had ever put on paper. I discovered that true love does not bind, it liberates, and that a person can have more than one home in their heart without betraying any of them. On the last day of our visit, something happened that changed everything forever. It was Sunday morning, and we all went to Mass together in the little chapel in the town. Me, Robert, Mary, James, Sarah, Lily, and our mother, who was having one of her most lucid days. The little church was small and simple, with worn wooden benches and images of saints painted on the walls. The priest, a young man who came from another town to celebrate Mass once a month, spoke about the parable of the prodigal son, that story of the young man who left home, spent everything he had, and then returned asking for his father's forgiveness. But it was what happened after the Mass that marked my soul forever. Robert and Mary were talking to some people at the church door when our mother approached them. I was playing with Lily in the adjacent yard, but I could hear the conversation. "You are blessed people," our mother said to them, her voice clear and firm. "You took care of my girl better than I ever could have." "Mrs. Margaret," Mary said humbly, "we are the ones who were blessed to have Emily in our lives. I want to ask you for something," our mother continued. "I want you to promise me that you will continue to be her parents, no matter what happens. She can come visit us whenever she wants, she can write letters, she can satisfy her longing whenever she needs to, but her place is with you." I felt my heart leap in my chest. My mother was making the decision for me. She was giving me the freedom that I didn't know how to take for myself. Robert cleared his throat, clearly emotional. "Ma'am, are you sure? Emily is your biological daughter." "Exactly for that reason," she interrupted. "Because she is my biological daughter, I know what is best for her. Here she would have love, but she wouldn't have the opportunities that you can give her. She is intelligent, studious. She deserves a better future than the hard life we lead here." Mary was crying softly, trying to be discreet. "You are a very wise mother," she managed to say. "I'm not wise, no," our mother replied. "I'm just a woman who loves her children and wants to see them happy. This is the ultimate act of a mother's love, not to hold on, but to let go for the sake of her child's happiness." In this single, selfless moment, two families officially become one. The painful choice Emily thought she had to make has just been transformed into a shared blessing. Let's see how this beautiful resolution plays out, and my Emily will be happier growing up away from poverty, having an education, having the chances to be whoever she wants to be. It was at that moment that I could no longer just listen. I let go of Lily's hand and ran to them, throwing myself into my mother's arms. "Mom, I don't want you to decide for me," I said, sobbing. "I want to decide with you." She hugged me tightly, kissing my hair as she did when I was little. "Then tell me, daughter, what does your heart tell you to do?" I looked around at James, who was smiling with tear-filled eyes, at Lily, who was holding the hem of my dress as if she didn't want to let me go, at Sarah, who was waving encouragingly, at Robert and Mary, who looked at me with so much love you could almost touch it. "My heart tells me to do what will put everyone at ease," I said. "And I know you will be at ease, knowing that I am being well cared for, that I am studying, that I am growing up in a family that can give me everything I need. And I will be at ease, knowing that you all understand that I love you all, but that sometimes true love means choosing what is best, not what is easiest." Our mother held me back a little to look me in the eyes. "Are you sure?" "I am," I replied, "but only if you promise me that I can come back here whenever I want, that I can bring my children to meet their grandparents and uncles when I grow up and have a family." "We promise," said James, joining our hug. "This will always be your home too." Lily came running and squeezed into the middle of the hug. "Will you write me letters?" she asked. "Every week," I promised, "and I'll send gifts. And when you turn 15, I'll ask Dad, Robert, and Mom Mary to let you spend a vacation at the farm." What happened next was one of the most beautiful scenes of my life. There, in front of the little church, the two families I loved came together in a single hug. James hugged Robert like a brother. Mary kissed our mother's face like a daughter kissing her own mother. Lily clung to Mary's neck, asking her to take good care of me. And in the center of it all, I understood the most important lesson life had ever taught me. True love doesn't divide, it multiplies. Each person we love doesn't diminish the love we have for others. It only makes our heart bigger and stronger. That afternoon, we had a farewell party in James's yard. Sarah killed a chicken and made a stew that smelled of cumin and sweet paprika. The women from the neighborhood brought sweet apple pies and burnt sugar candy. The men played the fiddle and accordion, and even our mother danced a little, holding my hands and singing an old song that I had forgotten. Robert and James talked at length about crops and livestock, discovering they had much in common, despite their very different lives. Mary taught Sarah a crochet stitch she didn't know, and received in return the recipe for the best peach cobbler she had ever tasted. When night fell and it was time for the final farewell, it wasn't as sad as I had imagined it would be. It was a farewell full of promises, of plans for the future, of the certainty that this was not an end, but a new beginning. Our mother gave me a street Christopher medal that had belonged to her grandmother, whom I barely remembered. "So you always remember that you have a family here praying for you every night," she said. James gave me a small piece of carved wood that he had made himself. It was a small, smooth little heart that fit in the palm of my hand. "So you always remember that a brother's love knows no distance," he said. Lily gave me a braid of her own hair, tied with a red ribbon. "So you always remember that you have a sister who admires you and wants to be like you when she grows up," she said. And when we finally got into the buggy that would take us back to the station, I wasn't leaving one family behind. I was taking two families with me in my heart, and that made me the richest person in the world. Today, in my old age, when I look back and see the path I've traveled, I understand that the girl lost on the train wasn't really lost. She was being taken where she needed to be, guided by a higher power that sometimes works in mysterious ways. I returned to the farm with Robert and Mary, and there I built a life full of simple and profound joys. I continued my studies. I graduated as a teacher, as Lily always wanted to be. I married a good young man named Joseph, whom I met in the neighboring town during a book fair. We had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, and each of them knew their 2 families. They grew up knowing they had roots in different places, but that all those roots made them stronger. I kept all the promises I made that Sunday in the little church. Lily came to spend vacations with us when she turned 15, and then came back many other times. She became a teacher as she dreamed, married a young man from the town next to hers, and gave me nephews who were the spitting image of James as a boy. James became the most respected farmer in the region, and whenever I visited, I saw how he had transformed that ungrateful land into a small green paradise. Our mother lived for many more years, and even with the disease stealing pieces of her memory, she never completely forgot me. Whenever I arrived for visits, something deep in her eyes would light up, like an ember fanned by the wind. In her last years, when she hardly recognized anyone anymore, she would still hum the lullaby she used to sing to put me to sleep. Robert and Mary grew old by my side, like the loving grandparents of my children. Robert taught my eldest son how to handle cattle, how to fish in the pond, how to mend a broken fence. Mary taught my daughter how to make bread, how to do cross-stitch, how to care for a vegetable garden with love. They died old and happy, knowing they were leaving a large and united family as their legacy. The farm passed to me and Joseph, and then to our children. Today, my grandchildren play under the same maple tree where I used to play, fish in the same pond, run through the same pasture. Life goes on with its joys and sorrows, its meetings and partings, its losses and discoveries. But the most important lesson I learned in those days of anguish and decision has stayed with me forever. There is no wrong choice when you choose with love. I could have stayed in the town with my blood family, and I would have been happy too, in a different way. I could have divided myself between the two places, spending half my life here and half there. Any decision would have been right, because it was born of love, was seasoned with wisdom, and was accepted with generosity by all who loved me. What couldn't continue was standing still in the middle of the road, suffering from not knowing how to choose, hurting myself and the people I loved most with my indecision. Life demands courage to make choices, even when we are not absolutely sure they are right. And do you know what I discovered, my dear? That the candle my family lit every year on my birthday was not a sign of sadness or of demand. It was a beacon of love, a way of telling me, even from a distance, that I was still a part of them, that my happiness was also their happiness. Years later, when I built my own house on the farm, I had a special lamp installed in the living room window, which I turned on every night before going to bed. It wasn't out of superstition or obligation. It was my way of returning that love, of sending a silent message through the darkness. I'm okay, I'm happy, and I love you too. Today, a widow, with my hair as white as cotton and my hands wrinkled by time, I still turn on that lamp every night. My grandchildren already know it's Grandma Emily's sacred ritual, and sometimes they stand with me at the window, looking into the distance and asking what I'm thinking about. I'm thinking of all the people I've loved in my life, I tell them, and how love is the only thing that truly remains when all else passes. Because that's it, my dear. Houses can crumble, cities can change, people can leave this world, but the love we plant in every heart we touch remains forever. It grows, it multiplies. It becomes a seed that sprouts in places we can't even imagine. That 9-year-old girl who woke up lost on a train didn't know she was starting the greatest adventure of her life. An adventure that had no dragons to face or treasures to conquer, but that had something much more precious. The discovery that the human heart is big enough to hold the whole world when we learn to love without fear. And if someone were to ask me, on the final day of this journey, if I would wish to change a thing, I would simply smile and shake my head. For every tear, every stumble, every silent embrace, and even the losses that felt insurmountable, all were necessary pieces for me to become who I am today. My dear friend, some stories aren't meant for lessons, but simply for remembering that there were times we were lost, yet never alone. That sometimes it is precisely when we feel most adrift that we are standing closer than ever to the truest version of ourselves. Life is a long train ride, with unannounced stops, and the final destination only heaven knows where that lies. Our task is to live each moment to the fullest, to love those who journey with us, and to trust that every curve, every turn, has its reason. If this story resonates with you, please subscribe to the channel, not to follow me, but so that we don't lose each other on this long journey.